Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a topic that might just make you grateful for your modern day plumbing and fresh laundry, the brutal reality of medieval hygiene. Close your eyes for a moment and picture yourself walking through a bustling medieval street. The air is thick, not with the scent of freshly baked bread, but with something far less appealing. You can almost feel the grit under your bare feet, the unwashed wool of your tunic itching against your skin. This isn't a romanticized tale of knights and fair maidens. This is the nitty-gritty, grimy truth. You're about to discover a world where cleanliness was a luxury, not a given, and where daily life would likely send your delicate modern sensibilities into a full-blown panic attack. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Here in Taibin, it's 7:46 p.m. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up, not to the gentle hum of an alarm, but to the persistent scratching of fleas and lice that have made your straw mattress their nightly rave venue. This isn't a nightmare, this is just Tuesday morning in the Middle Ages. Your skin, perpetually itchy, bears the marks of countless insect bites. You might casually scratch an armpit, releasing a cloud of, well, let's just say a complex aroma that has been diligently developing overnight. Forget the crisp scent of freshly washed sheets. Your bedding is a tapestry of sweat, dirt, and whatever unfortunate spills occurred during the night. The concept of changing linens regularly is an alien one, reserved perhaps for the most extravagant of noble households. And even then, regularly is a term used with considerable leniency. Most people sleep on straw pallets, which are rarely, if ever, cleaned when they get too infested or too putrid. You simply replace the straw, perhaps giving the wooden frame a cursory wipe. It's a bit like changing the litter box, but for humans. Imagine that lingering scent, day in and day out. It becomes part of you, a personal aura of unwashed humanity. As you rise, perhaps you stumble over a chamber pot that hasn't been emptied since yesterday morning. The contents, a pungent mixture of human waste. Sit there, slowly fermenting. There's no flush toilet, no instant disappearance of your bodily functions. This pot, often shared by an entire family, is a constant, fragrant reminder of your existence in the grand scheme of medieval life. It's a perfectly normal, albeit highly aromatic, fixture in your living space. You might even find it quaint in a darkly humorous way, how intimately connected you are to your own waste products. It's a good thing your sense of smell, over time, would probably dull to the point of being almost useless. Or at least, you'd hope so. Otherwise, every breath would be an assault. The idea of a morning shower is ludicrous. There's no running water, no hot water on demand. If you're lucky, and it's not winter, you might have access to a nearby well or stream. But access doesn't mean cleanliness. This water source also serves as the community's laundry facility, a place for animals to drink, and often, an unofficial dumping ground for various refuse. So, if you're thinking of a refreshing splash, you're more likely to be dousing yourself in a cocktail of animal waste, human effluvia, and whatever else has decided to float by. It's a historical truth that water, for many, was seen as a vector for disease, and bathing was often considered dangerous, especially hot baths which were believed to open pores and invite illness. So you simply don't bathe, not in the way we understand it today. Anyway, a quick wipe with a damp cloth, if you're feeling particularly fastidious, is about as good as it gets. You might attempt to clean your face and hands, but the rest of you, well, that's just a long-term project of accumulated grime. Let's talk about dental hygiene, or rather the distinct lack thereof. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste. You might try chewing on certain herbs or rubbing your teeth with a rough cloth, but these are more folk remedies than effective cleaning methods. Your breath, therefore, is a symphony of halitosis, a testament to fermented food particles and decaying teeth. You can expect to lose most of your teeth by your 30s, if not sooner. Cavities are rampant, infections are common, and the pain is excruciating. Imagine living with constant toothaches, with no painkiller stronger than perhaps some rudimentary herbal concoctions. It's enough to make you wince just thinking about it. You might even chew on a piece of charcoal, believing it to clean your teeth, but mostly, it just makes your mouth black. Clothing, your second skin, is rarely washed. Wool and linen, the primary fabrics, are difficult to clean and prone to shrinking or falling apart with frequent washing. So, you wear your clothes for weeks, months, sometimes even years, without a proper cleaning. The accumulated layers of dirt, sweat, and body odor become an integral part of the garment. This isn't just about smell, it's about texture. Your clothes would feel stiff, greasy, and perpetually damp with your own bodily excretions. It's a truly visceral experience. You might think about layering, adding a clean outer layer over a grimy inner one. But eventually, all layers succumb to the pervasive uncleanliness. It's a bit like wearing a permanent, personalized hazmat suit made of your own filth. One of the truly fascinating, if somewhat horrifying, details is the prevalence of shared clothing. It wasn't uncommon for people to own very few garments, sometimes just one or two outfits. When you factor in the infrequent washing, this means you're often wearing clothes that have seen more action than a medieval battlefield. Now, let's venture outside. The streets are not paved with gold, but with something far less appealing refuse: human and animal waste. Discarded food scraps and general garbage are routinely thrown out of windows and onto the streets. There are no sanitation departments, no regular garbage collections. The concept of public health infrastructure simply doesn't exist in the way we understand it. The stench, therefore, is overwhelming and pervasive. It's a rich, complex aroma that changes with the weather a damp. Fetid smell on a rainy day, a dry, dusty, pungent odor on a hot one. You'd quickly learn to breathe through your mouth, or perhaps develop a permanent nose wrinkle. Your shoes, if you have them, would be constantly caked in muck, if you don't. Your bare feet are a direct conduit to this environmental horror show. Animals, too, roam freely through the streets. Pigs, chickens, dogs, and horses contribute their own particular brand of waste to the already overflowing gutters. Imagine navigating a street that is essentially an open sewer and a farmyard rolled into one. It's a chaotic, filthy environment, and you're right in the thick of it. The flies, attracted to the pervasive filth, are a constant buzzing presence, landing on your food, your face, and transmitting whatever delightful pathogens they've collected from the street. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a significant health hazard. The sheer number of insects would be enough to drive a modern person absolutely mad. Public latrines, if they exist, are communal pits of unimaginable horror. Imagine a large hole in the ground, used by dozens, if not hundreds, of people throughout the day, rarely cleaned. The stench emanating from these places would be enough to peel paint. If paint existed in the way we know it, there's no privacy, no dignity, just a desperate need to relieve yourself in a shared, open cesspit. It's a truly humbling experience, stripping away any pretense of personal space or cleanliness. You'd likely hold it in as long as humanly possible, or find a secluded alleyway, which would then just add to the general street filth. Historians still debate whether the lack of widespread public sanitation was a deliberate choice or simply a consequence of limited technology and understanding. Some argue that urban planners in certain periods did attempt basic sewage systems, while others contend that the sheer volume of waste made any sustained effort impossible. Regardless, the outcome for the average medieval person was a truly brutal reality. Even if you were a noble, living in a grand castle, you weren't immune to the pervasive lack of hygiene. While a lord might have a private latrine, often built into the castle walls with a chute leading directly into the moat, a design feature that made attacking a castle even less appealing. These were still far from hygienic. The moat, therefore, became a reeking cesspool, a natural defense mechanism that also served as the castle's primary waste disposal system. Inside the castle, rush strewing, covering floors with rushes, herbs and flowers was common. This might sound pleasant, but these rushes were rarely changed, becoming a breeding ground for fleas, lice, and all manner of vermin, accumulating food scraps, spills, and general detritus beneath them. It was literally a carpet of filth, refreshed only periodically. Imagine living with that underfoot. It's a bit like having a constantly decomposing compost pile in your living room, but with more bugs. The kitchen, even in a noble household, would be a scene of questionable practices. Meat was often salted or smoked to preserve it, but refrigeration was non-existent. Food spoilage was a constant battle, and you often ate things that were on the verge of turning. Leftovers weren't carefully stored, they were often left out, inviting pests. The concept of cross-contamination was entirely unknown. The same knife that cut raw meat might then slice bread, without a rinse in between. It's a wonder anyone survived long enough to reach adulthood. The general understanding of food safety was based more on tradition and observation than any scientific knowledge. If it didn't immediately kill you, it was probably fine. Personal grooming, beyond scratching and perhaps a desultory wipe, was a different affair. Hair was a particular challenge. Washing it was rare and it quickly became greasy and matted, a perfect habitat for lice. Delousing combs, often made of bone or wood, were common personal items, used to scrape out the unwelcome inhabitants. It was a communal activity, with family members often delousing each other. Imagine someone meticulously going through your hair, picking out insects. This wasn't a sign of affection, it was a necessary chore. Beard grooming for men often involved simply trimming it, letting the oils accumulate, perfumes, often heavy and cloying, were used not for pleasant fragrance but to mask the truly overpowering body odors. It was a battle of strong scents against even stronger stenches. Even religious practices, which often emphasized purity, didn't necessarily translate to physical cleanliness as we understand it. While rituals of hand-washing might exist in certain contexts, widespread daily bathing for general cleanliness was not a central tenet for the masses. In fact, some ascetic practices even encouraged a rejection of physical comforts, including regular washing, as a sign of piety. So, even if you sought spiritual salvation, you might still be living in a cloud of your own accumulated dirt. The idea that cleanliness is next to godliness was a much later concept. For many, godliness was next to grubbiness. The general health of the population was, unsurprisingly, dire, life expectancy was low, and disease was rampant. Plagues, epidemics, and endemic illnesses like dysentery, tuberculosis, and smallpox constantly ravaged communities. This was not just due to a lack of medical knowledge, but fundamentally linked to the appalling hygiene. The sheer volume of human and animal waste, the contaminated water sources, the omnipresent insects, and the lack of personal cleanliness created a perfect breeding ground for pathogens. You were living in a literal petri dish of disease. Imagine the constant fear, the uncertainty, the ever-present threat of a sudden illness sweeping through your family or village. It wasn't a matter of if you got sick, but when, and how severely. And then, there was the additional misery of medieval medical treatments, which were often worse than the disease itself. Bleeding, purging, and bizarre concoctions made from animal parts or herbs were the order of the day. So, as you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you'll appreciate the simple luxury of a hot shower, a fresh change of clothes, and a clean, comfortable bed. The brutal reality of medieval hygiene reminds us just how far we've come, And perhaps how fortunate we are. You're still in this medieval skin, feeling the persistent itch of uninvited guests. Perhaps you've tried to scratch the biting insects away, a futile effort that only seems to stir them into a more furious frenzy. The truth is, your body is a constant landscape of microscopic life, a bustling metropolis for creatures that thrive on warmth and neglected skin. This isn't just about feeling dirty, it's about a constant, low-grade irritation that permeates every moment of your waking life, and probably haunts your dreams too. You learn to live with it, to mostly ignore it, but it's always there. A subtle hum beneath the surface of your consciousness as the sun begins to creep over the horizon, casting dim light into your hovel. Your thoughts turn to the most fundamental of human needs, relieving yourself. Remember that chamber pot. It's still there, a monument to the morning's impending unpleasantness. For most, the latrine is a communal affair, a place where privacy is an utterly foreign concept. Imagine a wooden bench, perhaps with several holes cut into it, positioned over a deep pit. You sit, shoulder to shoulder with your neighbors, carrying out the most private of acts in full view and earshot of everyone else. There's no flush, no running water, just the accumulated waste of days, weeks, perhaps even months, slowly composting below. The stench is, to put it mildly, overpowering. It hits you like a physical wall, an assault on your senses that makes your eyes water and your stomach churn. You try to breathe through your mouth, to focus on anything but the thick, putrid air, but it's an all-encompassing experience. It clings to your clothes, seeps into your hair, and follows you long after you've left the communal pit. If you're in a more rural setting, a designated privy might be a simple hole dug in the ground, perhaps with a flimsy screen for minimal concealment. But even here, the basic problems persist: the accumulation of waste, the attraction of flies, the inevitable runoff into local water sources when it rains. It's a far cry from the porcelain thrones and fragrant air fresheners you're used to. You quickly learn to do your business as fast as humanly possible, minimizing your exposure to the pervasive filth. And the concept of toilet paper. That's pure science fiction. You might use leaves, moss, or perhaps a handful of straw if you're lucky. More often, you rely on a communal sponge on a stick, which is, well, let's just say it gets reused. A lot. It's a truly humbling experience, reminding you of the stark difference between your modern expectations and the brutal reality of medieval life. The lack of widespread hand washing, especially after using these facilities, is a major contributor to the spread of disease. There's no soap as we know it, certainly not antibacterial hand soap. If you wash your hands at all, it's with plain water, which, as we discussed, might itself be contaminated. So you effectively carry the remnants of your and everyone else's business with you throughout your day. Imagine shaking hands with someone, or handling food, knowing the invisible trail of pathogens you're leaving behind. It's a grim thought, but it was simply the accepted norm. One historical detail that really makes you squirm is the lack of specific understanding about germs. People knew that bad smells miasmas were associated with disease, but they didn't understand the microscopic agents causing illness. So, they might try to mask smells with herbs. Rather than addressing the root cause of filth, let's talk about the streets themselves, because they are an extension of the medieval bathroom. There are no proper sewage systems. Open gutters run down the middle of most streets, carrying whatever liquid waste is dumped from houses and businesses. This includes kitchen slop, industrial effluent from tanneries, for example, which produce particularly noxious waste, and yes, human and animal excrement when it rains. These gutters overflow, turning the streets into muddy, flowing rivers of filth. You have to literally wade through this. Your shoes, if you have them, are constantly caked in layers of putrid mud and waste. If you're barefoot, which many are, you're directly exposed to all of it. Imagine the cuts and scrapes, the infections that would inevitably follow. It's a miracle anyone survived childhood in such conditions. Animals, as we touched on before, are everywhere, adding to the urban landscape of waste. Pigs scavenge through the refuse. Chickens peck at discarded scraps. Dogs roam freely, and horses are the primary mode of transport, leaving their droppings wherever they go. It's a truly multi-sensory experience, the constant braying, clucking, and barking, mixed with the omnipresent smells. You might even find yourself dodging a pig rooting through a pile of garbage on your way to the market. It's a city that functions less like a modern metropolis and more like a very large, very smelly farm. The integration of livestock into urban areas, while economically practical, exacerbated the hygiene crisis significantly. Even the architecture reflects this brutal reality. Houses are often built close together, with upper stories jutting out over the street. This design, while providing more living space upstairs, also meant that anything thrown from an upper window would land directly onto the street below, often narrowly missing unsuspecting passers-by. The common cry of garde l'eau, from the French garde à l'eau, meaning watch out for the water, would precede the dumping of chamber pot contents onto the street below. You learn to walk close to the buildings, hoping to avoid the occasional shower of human waste. It was a common hazard, and a grim reminder of the pervasive lack of sanitation. It's enough to make you paranoid about looking up. The concept of personal space, as a result of all this, is dramatically different. You are constantly in close proximity to unwashed bodies, to the smells of unemptied chamber pots, to the pervasive stench of the streets. It's a world where individual odors blend into a collective. Suffocating aroma. You don't have the luxury of stepping back, of isolating yourself from the general miasma. You are part of it, immersed in it, whether you like it or not. This forced intimacy with filth extends to public gatherings too. Imagine a crowded market, a church service, or a public execution. The combined body odor of hundreds, if not thousands, of unwashed individuals would be absolutely overwhelming. It's a powerful olfactory memory that you, as a modern person, can barely begin to comprehend. Consider also the public baths that existed in some larger medieval towns and cities. These might seem like a glimmer of hope for cleanliness. A small oasis in a desert of dirt, however, their use and cleanliness varied wildly. While some were relatively clean, others could quickly become cesspools, with the same water being used by many people, often without being changed frequently. They were also sometimes associated with unsavory activities, which led to their decline in popularity, particularly during periods of plague when communal bathing was seen as a dangerous way to spread disease. So, even the rare opportunity for a full body wash came with its own set of risks and questionable hygiene practices. Historians still debate whether public baths contributed more to health or to disease in the long run. Some argue they provided a vital, albeit imperfect, source of cleanliness for the masses, while others point to their role in disease transmission. It's one of those historical ambiguities that leaves you wondering about the true cost of communal living. The psychological impact of living in such pervasive filth is also worth considering. You would likely develop a certain level of desensitization, a coping mechanism for dealing with the constant assault on your senses. But beneath that, there would be an underlying discomfort, a lingering awareness of the grimminess of your existence. It shapes your worldview, your expectations of what normal means. Cleanliness, for you, is not a basic right but an unattainable ideal, or at best, a fleeting moment of respite. It's a life where discomfort is the baseline, and true comfort is a rare, almost mythical, state. This constant low-grade discomfort would affect your mood, your interactions, and perhaps even your dreams. It would be a relentless, unyielding companion. Even the food you eat, as nourishing as it might be, carries its own set of hygiene challenges. Open markets, where food is sold directly from carts or stalls, are exposed to flies, dust, and the general street grime. Meat, often without proper refrigeration, would quickly spoil, leading to foodborne illnesses. Bread, a staple, was often baked in unhygienic conditions. Imagine purchasing food that has been sitting out, uncovered for hours, perhaps even days, in an environment teeming with insects and various forms of waste. You'd have to trust that the cooking process, however rudimentary, would kill off most of the harmful bacteria. It's a daily gamble with your gut. It makes you really appreciate the sealed packaging and refrigeration of your local supermarket. You're still there, living this grim reality. And now your thoughts turn to the very fabric that covers your body, your clothes. Remember that distinct, complex aroma clinging to you. A good part of that comes from your garments, which are rarely, if ever, properly cleaned. Imagine wearing the same wool tunic, day in and day out, for weeks, sometimes months, without a wash. The wool itself, a natural fiber, would absorb sweat, dirt, and whatever unfortunate spills or splatters you encountered. It would become stiff with dried grime. A second, less pleasant skin that never truly felt clean. The fibers would be matted, the color dulled by embedded dust and human detritus. Linen, often used for undergarments, might be more frequently washed simply because it's lighter and dries faster. But frequently in the medieval sense still doesn't mean what it means today. And even then, the washing process itself is rudimentary. Imagine taking your precious linen shift down to the nearest stream or communal washing area. You'd scrub it vigorously against rocks or a washboard, perhaps using some harsh lye soap, which would be tough on both the fabric and your hands. Then you'd lay it out to dry, hoping the sun would bleach some of the stains and kill off some of the lingering odors. But the water, as we've established, is probably not pristine. So you're essentially rinsing your clothes in diluted sewage. It's a bit like trying to clean a mud-caked boot by dragging it through a swamp. The concept of having a vast wardrobe is, for most, laughable. You likely own one or two outfits, maybe three if you're particularly well off or of a higher status. This limited number of garments, coupled with the difficulty of cleaning them, means you're almost always wearing something that carries the marks of your daily existence. Tears aren't just cosmetic. They compromise the garment's integrity, and patching is a constant necessity. You become a walking testament to frugality and the brutal realities of material scarcity. And remember the fleas and lice. Your clothes are their prime real estate. They burrow into the seams, hide in the folds, and multiply with abandon. Every scratch you give yourself might dislodge a few, but countless more remain, making your clothing a constantly shifting, itching ecosystem. You learn to perform a quick, delousing pat-down on yourself, a discreet slap and brush to dislodge the worst of the crawlies before entering someone else's space. If you're feeling polite, now, let's talk about fashion, which, despite the underlying grime, still held importance. Medieval fashion, particularly for the wealthy, was often about demonstrating status and wealth through elaborate fabrics, colors, and cuts. But beneath the velvet and brocade, the basic hygiene problems persisted. Nobles might have more servants to assist with their dressing, and perhaps slightly more access to cleaner water for sponge baths. But they were still living in castles with open sewers and pest infestations. Their elaborate garments, often heavy and lined, would be even harder to clean than peasant clothes. Imagine a knight, resplendent in his finely woven tunic and hose, but underneath, the same itchy, unwashed linen as the common folk. It's a hilarious image, if not for the grim reality it represents. One fascinating and slightly disturbing detail is that strong perfumes and incense were used heavily, not just for aesthetic pleasure, but specifically to mask the pervasive body odors and the stench of unwashed clothes. It was a sensory battle, a fight to impose a more agreeable smell over the inescapable reality of medieval stink. The concept of cleanliness for special occasions, like weddings or religious festivals, might involve a slightly more thorough wipe down or perhaps a change into your best, least dirty outfit. But it was far from the modern expectation of pristine attire. You'd still be able to detect the lingering aroma of weeks, or even months of wear. It was simply the accepted standard. Your nose, over time, would acclimate, becoming desensitized to the constant assault of unpleasant smells. You wouldn't even notice it after a while, which is probably a mercy. Think about the sheer amount of lint, dust, and hair that would accumulate on your clothes and in your living space without vacuum cleaners or even proper brooms. This stuff would just build up your home. No matter how diligently you tried to maintain it, would be perpetually dusty and grimy. The air itself would be filled with particulates dust from fires, straw from bedding, and dried bits of whatever was being dumped outside. You are constantly breathing this in, and it settles on everything, even if you try to be meticulous. The environment itself was working against you. The practice of sharing clothes, while not universal, was certainly more common than it is today in poorer households. Garments would be passed down through family members, carrying with them the accumulated dirt and pests of previous wearers. Or, if you worked a particular trade, you might share specialized clothing or tools that were rarely, if ever, cleaned. Imagine borrowing a work tunic from a fellow laborer, knowing it hasn't been washed in weeks. It's not just a matter of discomfort, it's a direct pathway for the transmission of skin diseases and parasites. You accept it as a part of life, a necessary evil, but the underlying unease is always there. The impact of this pervasive uncleanliness extends beyond just personal discomfort. It feeds directly into the larger health crisis. Skin infections are common, fueled by constant itching, open sores from bites, and the general lack of proper wound care. Something as simple as a cut could easily become infected, leading to gangrene, limb amputation, or even death, without antibiotics or even basic antiseptic understanding. Even minor injuries could turn deadly. The sheer brutality of this everyday reality is staggering. It makes you realize that survival itself was a constant, grueling battle against your environment. Even the simple act of sleeping involves a continuation of this unhygienic reality. Your straw mattress, remember, is a haven for pests. As you sleep, they crawl over you, bite you, and make your nights restless. You might wake up covered in fresh bites, new welts adding to the existing landscape of skin irritation. The concept of a bug-free sleep is a luxury you can only dream of. And even then, your dreams might be interrupted by the phantom itch. It truly is a 24/7 battle against the unseen. The pervasive filth in medieval society was so fundamental that it shaped cultural norms and attitudes. People developed a tolerance for odors and sights that would be utterly repellent to modern sensibilities. The standards of beauty and attractiveness were different, less focused on pristine cleanliness and more on other attributes. You might find a knight attractive for his strength and bravery, not for his freshly washed hair. This desensitization is a powerful testament to humanity's adaptability. But it's also a stark reminder of the harshness of their daily lives. It makes you wonder how quickly your own standards would shift if you were suddenly transported back in time. Would you become just another part of the collective stench? Or would you try to maintain some semblance of modern cleanliness, fighting a losing battle against an entire era? Historians still debate whether medieval people were truly used to the smell and filth, or if they simply had no other choice but to endure it, masking their discomfort with strong perfumes and a collective sigh of resignation. It's a nuanced question, and one that highlights the complex relationship between human perception and environmental reality. So, as you consider your clothes, your home, and your very skin, remember that in the medieval world, cleanliness was a rare and fleeting state, a constant struggle against overwhelming forces of dirt, disease, and the sheer lack of effective tools. It truly gives you a new appreciation for Laundry Day. you're still enduring the relentless itch and the pervasive stench. And now we turn our attention to one of the most critical aspects of medieval life, health and medicine, or more accurately, the lack thereof. Deeply intertwined with the brutal realities of hygiene, imagine waking up with a searing headache, a throbbing pain in your belly, or a cough that rattles your entire chest. Your first thought isn't to reach for a painkiller or schedule a doctor's appointment, because those concepts, as you know them, simply don't exist. Instead, you face a world where illness is a constant, terrifying companion, often attributed to divine punishment, bad humors, or mysterious miasmas. The medical understanding of the time is, to put it mildly, rudimentary and often horrifying. The prevailing theory is the four humors blood: phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Sickness is believed to be caused by an imbalance of these humors within your body. So, if you're feeling unwell, a common treatment might involve bloodletting. Imagine a barber surgeon, perhaps with stained hands and a less than sterile razor, making an incision in your arm or leg, letting your bad blood drain into a bowl. The idea is to restore balance, but often, it simply weakens you further, leaving you susceptible to infection. It's a bit like trying to fix a leaky bucket by drilling more holes in it. You might feel temporarily relieved, but the underlying problem remains, and now you're dizzy and pale. Another popular treatment is purging, which involves inducing vomiting or diarrhea to expel perceived toxins from your body. You'd be given various herbal concoctions or even emetics that would violently clear your system. This, too, often leaves you severely dehydrated and even weaker than before. Imagine being bedridden, constantly nauseous or suffering from severe diarrhea, with no effective pain relief or rehydration solutions. Your recovery, if it comes, is often despite the treatment, not because of it. Then there are the remedies themselves, which range from the bizarre to the truly stomach-churning. You might be prescribed a poultice of herbs and animal excrement for a wound, or a potion made from ground-up pearls for a cough. Imagine having to ingest something concocted from a witch doctor's recipe book, knowing it probably tastes terrible and might do absolutely nothing, or even make you worse. The lack of scientific understanding means that efficacy is often confused with superstition or sheer desperation, one truly astonishing and somewhat disturbing. Detail is the use of trepanning, drilling a hole into the skull to cure mental illness, headaches, or even epilepsy. The belief was that this would release evil spirits or built-up pressure. The survival rate for such a procedure was, predictably, incredibly low. Imagine the terror of being strapped down for such an operation, with no anesthesia. And knowing your chances of survival are slim, childbirth is another terrifying ordeal, a leading cause of death for women, without modern sanitation, sterile instruments, or understanding of infection. The birthing process is incredibly risky. Midwives, while experienced, work in unhygienic conditions, and postpartum infections are rampant. Many women die from puerperal fever, a brutal infection of the uterus. Just days after giving birth, the sheer vulnerability of both mother and child is heartbreaking. You'd live in constant fear for the women in your family, knowing each pregnancy could be their last. Diseases like the Black Death, the bubonic plague would sweep through populations, utterly devastating communities. With no understanding of contagion and living in such close, unhygienic quarters, the plague would spread like wildfire. Imagine watching your neighbors, your friends, your family members succumb to gruesome symptoms: swollen lymph nodes, buboes, fever, vomiting, and eventually, death. There's nothing you can do but wait, hope, and perhaps pray, knowing that the very air you breathe, the people you touch, could be carrying the unseen killer. The sheer helplessness in the face of such widespread death is almost unimaginable. Even common ailments become life-threatening. A simple cut that today you'd clean and cover could quickly become infected, leading to gangrene and the need for amputation, performed without anesthesia by a barber surgeon wielding unsterilized tools. Imagine the excruciating pain, the brutal sight of your own limb being hacked off, and then the high probability of dying from infection anyway. The concept of minor surgery simply doesn't exist. Every medical intervention is a desperate gamble. The water you drink is often a conduit for illness. Remember those polluted wells and streams. They are teeming with bacteria and parasites, leading to widespread cases of dysentery and other gastrointestinal diseases. Diarrhea and vomiting become a common part of life, weakening you, dehydrating you, and making you vulnerable to other infections. You might try to drink ale or wine instead of water, believing it to be safer. But even these can carry their own risks if brewed in unsanitary conditions. It's a constant tightrope walk, trying to stay hydrated without poisoning yourself. Historians still debate whether medieval people fully understood the link between contaminated water and disease, with some arguing that boiling or fermenting water for drinks like ale was a practical, albeit accidental, form of sanitation. Others contend that the knowledge was largely empirical, learned through harsh experience, rather than scientific deduction. Children are particularly vulnerable. Infant mortality rates are staggeringly high, with many children not surviving past their 5th birthday. Malnutrition, preventable diseases, and lack of basic hygiene claim countless young lives. You would constantly be mourning, accustomed to the tragic reality that not every child would live to adulthood. The emotional toll of this continuous loss would be immense, a silent, heavy burden carried by every family. The lack of personal cleanliness also directly contributes to the spread of skin conditions and parasites. Scabies, ringworm, and various fungal infections are common. Your skin is a canvas of rashes, sores, and infestations, constantly itchy and irritated. This isn't just uncomfortable, it can lead to secondary infections when you scratch open your skin. Allowing bacteria to enter, imagine living with persistent, itchy sores that never seem to heal, adding to your general misery, even in larger cities with nascent hospitals. These institutions are more like hospices, places where the sick gather, often spreading diseases to one another. There's no isolation for contagious patients, no sterile environments. Doctors, if you can even access one, rely on observation and ancient texts, often misinterpreting symptoms and prescribing ineffective, or even harmful, treatments. The concept of a modern, clean, and sterile medical facility is centuries away. You're left to your own devices, relying on folk remedies, prayer, or simply enduring the illness, hoping your body's natural resilience is enough. So, as you ponder the health landscape of the medieval world, you realize that survival wasn't just about avoiding famine or warfare, it was a daily battle against the unseen enemies of disease, exacerbated by a complete lack of understanding about hygiene and infection. It truly makes you appreciate every vaccination, every sterile bandage, and every trip to the doctor you take for granted. You're still in the thick of it, living this medieval life. And now your hunger pangs begin to set in. But before you imagine a cozy meal, let's confront the brutal truth about medieval food. Fermentation and the ever-present threat of contamination. The journey of your food, from farm to table, is fraught with hygiene hazards that would make your modern stomach churn. Imagine the market. It's a bustling, chaotic place, filled with sounds, smells, and the constant buzz of flies. Meat hangs openly, exposed to the elements' dust, insects, and whatever microscopic particles are carried on the wind from the nearby streets. There's no refrigeration, of course, so preservation relies on methods like salting, smoking, or drying. These methods slow spoilage but don't eliminate it, especially in warmer weather. You might see a butcher hacking away at a carcass on a wooden block that hasn't been thoroughly cleaned in days, or even weeks. Blood. Bits of gristle. and discarded scraps lie on the ground, attracting scavenging animals and even more flies. It's a scene that is both vital for survival and utterly stomach-turning. You learn to eye your meat suspiciously, hoping for the best but always prepared for the worst. Vegetables and grains, while seemingly safer, come with their own risks. They are often grown using manure as fertilizer, which, while enriching the soil, also means they come into direct contact with animal and human waste. Washing produce is a concept, but the water sources, as we've already covered, are often contaminated. So you're essentially rinsing your carrots in water that might contain diluted sewage. It's a subtle form of contamination, but one that contributes to the high rates of parasitic infections and gastrointestinal illnesses. You might attempt to peel things, but even then, the handling of the food before it reaches your hands is a significant variable. Cooking itself is often done over an open fire, which, while sterilizing by heat, introduces other issues. Smoke fills your living space, coating surfaces and lungs, and the cooking utensils. They are rarely scrubbed to a pristine shine. Imagine a well-used iron pot, blackened with soot and encrusted with the remnants of countless previous meals. It might be scraped out, but thorough washing with soap and hot water is a rarity. The concept of separate cutting boards for meat and vegetables is centuries away, meaning cross-contamination is rampant. The same knife that just cut raw chicken might then slice the bread for your meal. Without a rinse in between, it's a culinary gamble with every bite. Bread. The staple of the medieval diet is often baked in communal ovens, which are usually hot enough to kill most pathogens. However, the conditions in which the flour is stored and handled, and the cleanliness of the bakers themselves, are less reliable. Rats and mice are a constant problem in granaries and bakeries, nibbling at sacks of grain and leaving their droppings behind. It's a persistent, silent contamination that you're entirely unaware of. Now, let's talk about drinks. Water, as we've explored, is often unsafe. This is why ale and cider are such common beverages for all ages, even children. The fermentation process in brewing involves boiling the water, which kills most harmful bacteria, making these drinks generally safer than raw water. But even here, cleanliness in the brewing process is not always guaranteed. Imagine the vats and barrels, often made of wood, that are difficult to clean thoroughly. Residue from previous batches can build up, affecting the taste and potentially harboring unwanted microbes. You drink it anyway, because it's the best option available. This widespread reliance on fermented beverages contributed to a low-level chronic alcoholism, but it was also a survival strategy. Historians still debate whether medieval people knew boiling water made it safer, or if it was simply a happy accident that fermented drinks were less likely to make you sick. The truth likely lies somewhere in between practical observation leading to habit, rather than scientific understanding. Leftovers are another major source of contamination. There's no refrigeration, no airtight containers. Food is simply left out, exposed to flies, dust, and general room temperature. If you have leftovers, you eat them quickly, hoping they haven't turned spoiled food. While sometimes detectable by smell or taste, is often consumed anyway if hunger is great enough. The constant risk of food poisoning is a background hum to every meal. You become accustomed to a certain level of digestive discomfort, a persistent grumbling in your gut that you just learn to live with. Even something as simple as eating utensils is a hygiene hazard. For most, cutlery is minimal, often just a knife. You eat with your hands, and as we know, hand washing is rare and ineffective. So, you're constantly transferring whatever microbes are on your hands directly to your mouth. Communal eating from shared platters or bowls is common, meaning multiple hands are reaching into the same food, further spreading germs. It's a truly communal culinary experience. For better or worse, you might even find yourself wiping your hands on your trousers, adding another layer of grime to your already well-worn clothing. It's truly shocking how many points of contact there are for contamination. The hygiene challenges extend to the very preparation of food. Imagine a medieval kitchen smoky, often dimly lit, and usually quite grimy. There are no smooth, easily washable surfaces like stainless steel. Everything is wood, stone, or iron, all porous materials that are difficult to clean thoroughly. Pest control is non-existent, so mice, rats, and insects are constant companions in the kitchen, scurrying across surfaces, leaving droppings, and contaminating ingredients. It's a constant battle against a hidden enemy, one you can't even see but whose presence is undeniable. The sheer amount of effort involved in preparing a meal, from gathering and preserving ingredients to the actual cooking, also means that every scrap is precious. Waste is minimized because food is hard won. This frugality, while economically sensible, can also mean that less than perfect ingredients are used, or that food is consumed even if it's on the verge of spoiling. Simply to avoid waste, it's a trade-off between hunger and health, and hunger often wins. So, as you swallow that mouthful of slightly suspect stew, remember that in the medieval world, every meal was a testament to resilience, a gamble with your digestive system, and a brutal reminder of the raw, unpolished reality of life without modern sanitation and food safety standards. It truly makes you appreciate the sterile packaging and sell-by dates of your modern groceries. You're still entrenched in this medieval existence, the phantom smells and lingering discomfort clinging to you. Now, let's consider something utterly fundamental to life itself, something we take entirely for granted: water. In the medieval world, water was a constant source of both life and death, a stark reminder of the brutal realities of pollution and limited sanitation. Imagine you need water for drinking, cooking, or even a rudimentary wash. Your options are severely limited, for most, especially in rural areas. The nearest well, river, or stream is your primary source. This sounds idyllic. Doesn't it? A babbling brook. Fresh spring water. The brutal reality, however, is far from picturesque. These same water sources are often where people do their laundry, where animals drink and graze, where industrial waste from tanneries or dyeing operations is dumped, and where, inevitably, human and animal waste finds its way. Think of the runoff from fields fertilized with manure, or from those charming open gutters we discussed earlier. It all flows downhill, directly into your water supply. It's a bit like trying to fill a clean glass from a gutter during a rainstorm. So, when you dip your bucket into the village well, you're not drawing up pristine, crystal clear liquid. You're pulling up a cocktail of whatever has leached into the groundwater, whatever has been tossed in by careless hands, and whatever bacteria and parasites are thriving in that environment. The water might look clear enough to the naked eye, but it's a microscopic battleground. You drink it because you have no other choice, and then you hope for the best. This constant exposure to contaminated water is a primary reason for the prevalence of gastrointestinal diseases like dysentery, which would sweep through communities, weakening people and often proving fatal. Particularly for children, diarrhea was so common it was almost considered a normal part of life, rather than a symptom of a serious illness. In urban centers, the situation could be even worse. While some larger towns might have rudimentary aqueducts or communal pumps, these systems were still vulnerable to contamination. Pipes, if they existed, were often made of lead, slowly poisoning the water. Reservoirs could be open to the elements, accumulating dust, animal droppings, and anything else the wind carried. Public fountains, while a source of pride, would quickly become dirty from constant use and lack of regular cleaning. The communal aspect meant that if one person introduced contaminants, everyone was at risk. You might see a fine gentleman filling his jug at a public fountain, while just a few feet away, someone else is emptying a chamber pot onto the street that will eventually find its way into the same water system. It's a continuous, invisible cycle of contamination. The disposal of waste is intricately linked to the water problem. Without proper sewage systems, Human and animal waste is simply deposited directly into waterways or onto the land, from where it eventually leaches into the water table or runs off into rivers and streams. Imagine living next to a river that serves as both your drinking water source and your community's open sewer. The smell would be constant, and the visible pollution would be undeniable. Yet, for many, this was simply the norm. It highlights a brutal truth medieval people often lacked the scientific understanding of germ theory, so they didn't fully comprehend the direct link between waste, water, and disease. They knew bad smells were bad, but not why they were bad in a microscopic sense. Even the process of collecting water is a daily chore. There's no tap to turn on. You have to walk to the well or river, often carrying heavy buckets back to your home. This physically demanding task is done multiple times a day, every day, rain or shine. It's a constant reminder of the effort required for even the most basic necessities, and the precariousness of life when your most vital resource is so easily compromised. You develop strong arms, but also a persistent backache. Consider the craftspeople and industries, tanners, who process animal hides. Use incredibly foul-smelling and polluting chemicals and animal byproducts. Dyers use various dyes that are often toxic. These industrial wastes are almost invariably dumped into the nearest water body. So, if you live downstream from a tannery, your water supply is not only contaminated with human waste, but also with industrial effluvium, adding another layer of unpleasantness and health risk. The vibrant colors of freshly dyed cloth come at the cost of heavily polluted local waterways. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval industries contributed to water pollution, but it's clear that their practices had a significant, localized impact on water quality, often making it unusable for drinking or bathing. The lack of understanding about clean water also impacts cooking, while boiling water for ale or wine helped. Cooking directly with contaminated water for stews or porridges could still spread illness. The heat might kill some pathogens, but others could survive, or the toxins they produced could remain. It's a subtle but persistent threat that affects every meal. You might complain about your food, not realizing the problem started with the water it was cooked in. The sheer volume of human and animal waste generated by even a small medieval town is staggering. And without a systematic way to manage it, the environment becomes saturated. The ground around your home, the alleys, the fields, all become part of the informal waste disposal system. When it rains, everything gets washed into the nearest ditch, then stream, then river. Completing the cycle of pollution, you learn to step carefully, to avoid puddles that might be more than just rainwater, and to hold your breath when passing certain particularly malodorous spots. It's a constant engagement with the unspeakable. So, as you thirst for a drink, remember that in the medieval world, accessing clean water was a daily gamble, a brutal test of survival against unseen enemies that lurked in every droplet. It truly makes you appreciate the simple, taken for granted miracle of turning on your tap. You're still steeped in this medieval reality, a constant layer of grime, your unwanted companion. Now, let's turn our attention to personal grooming, or rather, the bizarre and often ineffective practices that passed for it. Forget your morning routine of showering, shampooing, and moisturizing. Your medieval counterpart had a vastly different and far less pleasant approach to feeling or at least appearing clean. Imagine your hair. It's long, likely unwashed for weeks, if not months. It's a greasy, tangled mess, dull with accumulated dust and sweat. The concept of shampoo is centuries away. If you wash your hair at all, it's with plain water, perhaps with some rudimentary lye soap that would strip it rather than cleanse it, leaving it coarse and brittle. More likely, you don't wash it. The natural oils build up, making it heavy and prone to matting, and nestled within those greasy strands, lice. These tiny parasites are a ubiquitous problem, a constant source of itching and discomfort. Delousing combs, often made of bone, wood, or even metal, are common personal items. You'd sit with family members, meticulously combing through each other's hair, scraping out the unwelcome inhabitants. It's a communal, almost ritualistic, active infestation management. Imagine the feeling of those tiny creatures crawling on your scalp, a persistent, maddening tickle. For men, beards are common, and they too become repositories for dirt, food scraps, and, inevitably, more parasites. Trimming might happen with a sharp knife, but true beard grooming, as we understand it, with oils and balms, is a luxury for the very few. Your beard, therefore, is often a stiff, unkempt mass, a testament to its accumulated history. It's not a fashion statement so much as a natural consequence of the lack of proper tools and habits. Teeth, as we briefly mentioned, are a lost cause for most. There are no toothbrushes, no toothpaste. You might try rubbing your teeth with a rough cloth or chewing on certain herbs to freshen your breath. But decay is inevitable. You live with constant toothaches, gum infections, and the gradual loss of your teeth by middle age. The concept of dental hygiene simply doesn't exist in a meaningful way. Your breath would be, to modern sensibilities, truly offensive. Imagine trying to have a close conversation, aware of the putrid air escaping your mouth. Body odor is not just a personal issue, it's a collective experience. Without regular bathing, and with clothes rarely washed, everyone carries a distinct personal aroma, a potent blend of sweat, stale skin, and unwashed fabric. Perfumes, when available, are not subtle enhancements but powerful, heavy scents designed to mask, rather than eliminate, the underlying stench. They are often made from animal musk or strong floral essences, applied liberally to overpower the prevailing body odors. It's a sensory battle, a fight to make yourself slightly less offensive in a world of pervasive smells. You might also carry small sachets of dried herbs or flowers, hoping their fragrance provides a momentary respite from the overwhelming reality. Even basic skincare is non-existent. Your skin, constantly exposed to dirt, sun, and harsh weather, is likely rough, chapped, and prone to sores and infections from constant itching. There's no moisturizer, no sunscreen. If you have a cut or a scrape, it's typically treated with rudimentary herbal poultices, if anything. And the risk of infection is incredibly high. You might try to cleanse wounds with wine or vinegar, which provided some antiseptic qualities. But the process was painful and the results uncertain. The sheer number of persistent skin conditions, rashes, fungal infections. Boils would be a constant visual reminder of the pervasive lack of hygiene. The daily ritual of dressing is also telling. You don your unwashed clothes, feeling the familiar stiffness and the subtle itch of their unseen inhabitants. There's no fresh scent, no crispness. It's simply the same familiar garment, a second skin of accumulated history. You might try to air it out, perhaps hang it outside on a rare sunny day, hoping the wind and sun do some small magic. But a true deep clean is almost impossible. Consider the notion of cleanliness as a status symbol, while everyone lived in a generally unsanitary world. The very wealthy might have slightly better access to resources. They might have more changes of clothes, access to more servants to perform tasks like delousing, and perhaps even private rooms for sponge baths. Though true bathing was still rare, yet even they lived in castles infested with pests, surrounded by open sewers and breathing the same polluted air. The difference was one of degree, not of kind. No one was truly clean by modern standards. Historians still debate the extent to which medieval nobility prioritized cleanliness. Some evidence suggests they were more fastidious than common folk, employing various perfumed waters and cleaning rituals. Others argue that despite appearances, their overall hygiene was only marginally better due to systemic issues. It's a fascinating look at how relative standards of cleanliness can be. The concept of personal space also ties into grooming. In a world where people are constantly in close proximity, and everyone carries a noticeable scent, your personal bubble is much smaller. You are constantly aware of other people's odors, and they of yours. It's an unavoidable, sensory intimacy that modern society largely avoids through constant washing and deodorizing. You learn to suppress your gag reflex, to simply accept the reality of the human smell in all its unvarnished glory. So, as you apply your deodorant and step into a fresh shower tonight, remember that for your medieval counterpart, personal grooming was a never-ending, often losing, battle against an overwhelming tide of dirt, parasites, and bodily effluvia. It truly puts your morning routine into a whole new light. You're still navigating the grime-caked existence of the medieval world. And now, let's immerse ourselves in the very heart of its brutal hygiene, the urban environment. Forget the picturesque images of cobblestone streets and quaint marketplaces. Medieval cities were a symphony of stench, a chaotic, disease-ridden landscape where every step was a gamble and every breath an assault on the senses. Imagine stepping outside your humble dwelling in a bustling medieval town. The first thing that hits you isn't the sounds of commerce, but the overwhelming smell. It's a complex, multi-layered aroma, the pungent tang of stale human waste, the sweet sickly odor of decaying refuse, the sharp metallic tang of blood from the butcher's stall, the acrid smoke from countless cooking fires, and the heavy, earthy smell of unwashed bodies. This isn't a fleeting smell, it's a pervasive, clinging miasma that permeates everything. You learn to breathe through your mouth, or perhaps your nose simply becomes desensitized. A mercy in disguise. It's a constant, visceral reminder of the lack of sanitation. The streets themselves are not paved for easy walking. They are often unpaved dirt tracks, or roughly cobbled, which quickly become choked with refuse. There are no organized garbage collection services. Instead, household waste, food scraps, ashes, broken pottery, and often, the contents of chamber pots is simply thrown out into the street. Imagine walking down a narrow alleyway, dodging not only the occasional pig rooting through a pile of refuse, but also the constant threat of a chamber pot being emptied from an upper window with a perfunctory "Gardy loot and me" warning. You learn to stay alert, to hug the walls, and to sprint through particularly hazardous stretches. It's a literal minefield of human and animal waste. Open gutters, running down the middle or along the sides of the streets, serve as the primary sewage system. These are not design channels. They are simply depressions where liquid waste collects and flows, often sluggishly, through the town. This includes not only rainwater but also kitchen slop, industrial effluent from tanneries and dye works which are particularly noxious, and the overflow from public latrines or direct human excretion. When it rains, these gutters overflow, turning the streets into shallow, muddy rivers of putrid water and filth. Your shoes, if you have them, are perpetually caked in this vile mixture if you're barefoot, which many poorer people are. You're directly wading through it. The risk of cuts, infections, and parasitic infestations from walking through such an environment is incredibly high. Animals are an integral, yet unhygienic, part of urban life. Pigs, often raised for food, roam freely through the streets, acting as informal garbage disposals, rooting through refuse and adding their own waste to the mix. Chickens scratch in the dirt. Dogs wander, and horses are the primary mode of transport, leaving piles of manure everywhere. It's a dynamic, messy ecosystem, with animals contributing to the filth while also potentially spreading diseases. The constant presence of flies, attracted to the vast amounts of organic waste, is another layer of torment. Buzzing around your face, landing on food, and acting as vectors for disease transmission. It's a constant battle against tiny, winged menaces. Housing density in medieval cities is incredibly high. Buildings are packed tightly together, often with upper stories jutting out over the street, further reducing light and air circulation and exacerbating the problem of waste disposal from windows. This close proximity means that if disease breaks out, it spreads with terrifying speed. There's no concept of social distancing. You are constantly breathing the same air as hundreds, if not thousands of others, all living in deeply unhygienic conditions. Imagine the confined spaces, the lack of ventilation, and the sheer number of bodies concentrated in such a small area. It's a breeding ground for respiratory illnesses and epidemics. Public spaces, even those intended for gathering and commerce, reflect this pervasive lack of cleanliness. Markets, while vibrant centers of trade, are also teeming with flies, exposed food, and the constant presence of waste. Churches, while places of spiritual solace, would have been filled with the combined body odor of the congregation, and often suffered from their own pest problems. Even grand castles and cathedrals, while impressive, were not immune. Their courtyards would be muddy and animal-fouled, and inside. Rushes on the floor would accumulate dirt and vermin, acting as a living carpet of filth. It truly is difficult to find an oasis of cleanliness. Historians still debate the specific causes of major urban fires in medieval times, but the combination of tightly packed wooden buildings and vast amounts of dry refuse certainly created an extreme fire hazard. The very air you breathe is laden with particulate matter dust from the streets, smoke from countless hearths and industrial fires, and the microscopic particles of dried waste. Your lungs are constantly working to filter this polluted air. Long-term exposure would inevitably lead to respiratory problems, coughs, and chronic lung conditions. It's a silent, invisible killer that affects everyone, regardless of their social standing. The psychological impact of living in such constant squalor is profound. You develop a high tolerance for discomfort and unpleasantness. Your senses become dulled, your expectations lowered. The concept of a truly clean environment, free from pervasive odors and visible grime, is simply beyond your lived experience. This desensitization is a survival mechanism, but it also means you're constantly living with a low-grade assault on your well-being. It's a brutal normalization of the abnormal. So, as you walk through your clean, well-lit modern city tonight, remember that for your medieval ancestor, urban life was a relentless, multi-sensory challenge, a brutal testament to human resilience in the face of pervasive filth and unimaginable squalor. It makes you profoundly grateful for sanitation engineers and waste management. You're still enduring the pervasive grime and pungent air of the medieval world. And now let's explore a surprisingly influential, yet often contradictory, aspect of medieval hygiene: the church's role and religious beliefs. You might expect that an institution emphasizing purity and godliness would champion physical cleanliness. But the reality was far more nuanced and, at times, contributed to the prevailing lack of hygiene. Imagine stepping into a grand cathedral, hoping for spiritual solace. While the architecture might be breathtaking, the air inside is likely heavy with the lingering scent of unwashed bodies, frankincense, and stale wax. Despite the emphasis on spiritual purity, physical cleanliness was often seen as less important, or even a distraction from the true path to salvation. Some ascetic Christian movements actively promoted the rejection of bodily comforts and cleanliness as a form of piety. Imagine saints who famously wore the same garments for years, accumulating layers of grime and attracting vermin, viewing this self-neglect as a sign of their devotion. This extreme form of piety, while not universal, certainly influenced the general perception of hygiene. It's a bit like believing that letting your car rust is a sign of good driving. The logic is certainly flawed from a modern perspective. However, it wasn't a complete rejection of all washing. Ritualistic washing, particularly of hands and feet, was part of certain religious ceremonies and monastic life. Monks, for example, might wash their hands before meals or perform foot-washing rituals on certain holy days. But this was distinct from daily full-body bathing for general cleanliness. It was symbolic, focused on spiritual cleansing rather than physical purification in the modern sense. You might participate in such a ritual, feeling a momentary sense of refreshment, only to return to your unwashed clothes and the pervasive odors of your daily life. The church also played a significant role in establishing hospitals and charitable institutions. These were often run by monastic orders and provided care for the sick and the poor. However, as we discussed, medieval hospitals were far from sterile environments, while they offered some solace in basic care. The lack of understanding about contagion meant that diseases often spread rapidly within their walls. So, while the intention was benevolent, the practical hygiene often left much to be desired. You might seek refuge in such a place, hoping for healing, but knowing you're surrounded by other sick people, with the air thick with coughs and the sounds of suffering. Furthermore, religious festivals and pilgrimages, while important for spiritual life, often exacerbated hygiene problems. Large numbers of people would travel long distances, often in close quarters. Without access to proper sanitation, imagine thousands of pilgrims converging on a holy site, all bringing their accumulated grime, parasites, and potential diseases with them. The temporary encampments around these sites would quickly become cesspools of waste and filth, creating ripe conditions for epidemics. The spiritual fervor was often matched by a brutal physical reality. It's truly a testament to faith when you consider the physical hardships involved. The church's influence also extended to the suppression of public baths, particularly during the later medieval period. While some public baths existed, their association with immorality and prostitution, coupled with growing fears during outbreaks of plague, led to many being shut down or falling into disuse. The belief was that open pores from hot baths made people more susceptible to disease, or that communal bathing encouraged sinful behavior. So, religious morality, perhaps inadvertently, contributed to a decline in opportunities for communal bathing, further entrenching the habits of infrequent washing. Historians still fiercely debate the primary reasons for the decline of public baths in Europe. Was it primarily due to moralistic concerns from the church, fears about disease, or simply economic factors and changing social customs? The interplay of these forces makes it a complex historical puzzle. Moreover, the emphasis on the spiritual realm often meant that practical concerns about earthly conditions, like sanitation, were given less priority. For many, life on earth was a temporary, often suffering, passage to the afterlife. Therefore, enduring discomfort and grime was simply part of the earthly trial. This fatalistic view could, at times, lead to a certain resignation about poor living conditions rather than an active pursuit of public health initiatives. You might hear sermons emphasizing the fleeting nature of worldly comforts, subtly reinforcing the idea that physical discomfort was part of the divine plan. However, it's also important to acknowledge that some religious orders, particularly those focused on charity and communal living, did implement relatively higher standards of cleanliness within their own monasteries or convents. Compared to the general population, they often had access to better water sources and more disciplined routines. But these were isolated pockets of relative hygiene, not widespread societal norms. So, if you were fortunate enough to live near a well-run monastery, you might see a glimpse of what better hygiene could offer, but it would be a rare exception. So, as you consider the role of faith in the medieval world, remember that while the church offered spiritual guidance and solace, its influence on physical hygiene was complex, sometimes promoting basic ritualistic washing, sometimes providing care for the sick, but often, paradoxically, contributing to the overall lack of widespread cleanliness through moralistic stances or a focus on the spiritual over the physical. It's a fascinating look at how belief systems can profoundly shape daily life in unexpected ways. You're nearing the end of your journey through the unwashed world of the Middle Ages, still smelling the phantom scents and feeling the lingering itch. Now, let's reflect on how this pervasive medieval filth wasn't just a temporary discomfort, but left lingering legacies, shaping not only subsequent eras but also our very understanding of cleanliness and health. Imagine the sheer amount of historical information that has been lost or misinterpreted because of the fundamental differences in hygiene. When historians study medieval texts or archaeological sites, they are constantly grappling with the implications of a world where human and animal waste was ubiquitous, where disease was rampant, and where personal cleanliness was an alien concept by modern standards. This understanding fundamentally alters how we interpret everything from population demographics to daily routines. It's like trying to understand a complex machine without realizing one of its primary functions was to generate a lot of waste. The persistent impact of medieval hygiene, or lack thereof, can be seen in the very development of cities. The overwhelming stench and disease of medieval urban centers eventually pushed later generations to develop more sophisticated public health initiatives. The horrors of repeated plagues and epidemics, directly exacerbated by unsanitary conditions, gradually led to a shift in understanding. People began to associate disease not just with divine punishment or miasmas, but with tangible factors like overcrowded housing, contaminated water, and open sewers. This slow, painful realization was a direct legacy of the medieval experience. You might think of it as a delayed, societal post-traumatic stress disorder, finally leading to action centuries later. The construction of modern sewage systems and clean water infrastructure is a direct descendant of medieval squalor. The grand engineering feats of Victorian sewers, for example, were not just technological marvels. They were a desperate response to centuries of living in cities that literally drowned in their own waste. The understanding that clean water prevents disease, and that separating human waste from living spaces is crucial, was a hard-won lesson, etched into the collective consciousness by generations of suffering. Imagine the relief as these systems were slowly implemented. The air beginning to clear, the water becoming safer. It was a revolution born of desperation. Even our modern concepts of beauty and personal care are legacies. The emphasis on smooth skin, clean hair, and fresh breath that we take for granted today is a relatively recent development. A stark contrast to the medieval aesthetic where rough skin, unkempt hair, and strong body odors were simply the norm. Our modern obsession with hygiene, with antibacterial soaps and frequent showers, is a direct reaction to the memory, conscious or unconscious, of those brutally unhygienic times. It's almost as if we're trying to overcompensate for centuries of accumulated grime. The development of germ theory in the 19th century, a groundbreaking scientific leap that finally explained why medieval hygiene was so catastrophic, was the ultimate validation of centuries of anecdotal evidence and suffering. Figures like Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch provided the scientific framework that finally allowed humanity to break free from the cycle of disease that had plagued the Middle Ages. This scientific understanding allowed for targeted interventions, sterile medical practices, and ultimately, a dramatic increase in life expectancy. It's the moment when humanity finally put a name to the invisible enemies that had been causing so much misery for centuries. Historians still debate the specific scientific and social forces that converged to allow for the acceptance of germ theory. Was it the sheer scale of the cholera epidemics? Or was it a gradual shift in scientific methodology? It's a complex tapestry of progress. Consider the enduring stereotypes of the Dark Ages, while often oversimplified. The image of a dirty, disease-ridden era isn't entirely unfounded. It's a popular historical truth that the medieval period was characterized by significantly poorer hygiene than, say, the Roman Empire that preceded it, contributing to its dark reputation. This perception, even if exaggerated, serves as a powerful reminder of how dramatically different living conditions were, and how fortunate we are today. Even subtle linguistic traces remain. Phrases like caught a bug or feeling under the weather subtly echo a time when diseases were mysterious, invisible entities that simply caught you, and where changes in weather were believed to directly influence health, often through their impact on miasmas. These aren't just quaint idioms, they are whispers from a time when the world was a far less understood and far more dangerous. place, the overall shift in human consciousness regarding cleanliness, from a minor concern to a fundamental aspect of health and well-being, is perhaps the most profound legacy. We now instinctively understand the link between hygiene and health, a connection that was painstakingly discovered over centuries of trial, error, and immense suffering. This isn't just about feeling clean, it's about a deeply ingrained understanding of how to protect ourselves from illness. It's a triumph of public health that began with the brutal lessons of the medieval world. So, as you slowly emerge from this journey into the brutal reality of medieval hygiene, take a deep breath. Feel the clean air in your lungs. Consider the comfortable, sanitized environment around you. The pervasive filth of the Middle Ages wasn't just a historical curiosity, it was a powerful, brutal teacher. It taught humanity, slowly and painfully, the indispensable value of cleanliness, shaping the very foundations of the comfortable, healthy world you inhabit today.